It is really an honor to introduce our first speaker here. I've had the privilege of working on climate policy for over 30 years, and when I got started on it, my first assignment was working with the US EPA on 2 reports to Congress that Congress requested back in the 80s on this climate question. They wanted to know what's the science and the effects of climate change and what can we do about it. And those initial reports, there was no politics involved in it. It was an honest request for information and understanding. And one of the names that immediately popped up in the work that we were doing was Dr. Ramanathan. He has been working in this field for quite some time. His work has been making an impression from the get-go. And I just want to touch on a few of his highlights because it is very impressive. He really has discovered, the greenhouse effect of halocarbons, particularly CFCs, on the greenhouse effect. Some seminal work back in the 1970s. He led a critical international field experiment in the 1990s, along with Dr. Paul Crutzen, that discovered the widespread atmospheric brown clouds circling over South Asia. Those impacts have devastating health and climate effects. And out of that work was the finding that mitigating these short-lived climate pollutants, the black carbon, the methane, the ozone, the HFCs, can make a considerable impact on slowing down global warming. His work in this area has been adopted by the United Nations and 30 countries, including the USA, and a new coalition called the Climate and Clean Air Coalition that's working to mitigate these short-lived climate pollutants across the planet. He's won numerous prestigious awards, including the Tyler Prize, which is a top environmental prize given in the US, the Volvo Prize, the Rosby Prize, and the Zayed Prize. And as if that wasn't enough, he's now serving on Pope Francis's Council for the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. I could go on, but I know Dr. Ramanathan wants to get back to San Diego before the sun goes down. So I did want to say that he is the Distinguished Professor for the Scripps Institute of Oceanography at the University of California at San Diego and the UNESCO Professor of Climate and Policy at Terry University in Delhi, India. Dr. Ramanathan, thank you for coming. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the gracious introduction. When you talked about the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, it brought back a fond and a sad memory. We wrote a paper about this opportunity to cut down climate change drastically, very quick, by cutting down these 4 pollutants, black carbon, methane, CFCs, and HFCs, and ozone. You know who read that? We published it in Foreign Affairs. Hillary Clinton read it and immediately told her staff to start this coalition. So when she invited me when this coalition was open. So I think more than her husband, Bill Clinton, I was the most devastated when she didn't make it to the presidency. So if I can have my first slide, please. Yeah, I just want to mention right off the bat from the title, very few have realized how urgent and imminent is the climate change problem. Amongst the leaders, only 2 I can think of, and I'm honored I know both of them, briefed them, Pope Francis and our Governor Jerry Brown. Most other leaders I hear, they've not even got their head around how imminent it is. And the other thing is, I congratulate the cap and trade funds and others, and they say we're generating billions. And I'm thinking now, this is a $1 trillion problem, what we are trying to solve. So what you're doing is amazing, but I just want to let you know, be ready to get a lot more busy We need to get a lot more funds to solve this problem. So let me set the stage for this. If I can have the first slide, the next. Oh, I advance it. Oh, yeah. So I know I go to many talks. I forget most of them. You're going to forget this talk soon, within a week. But I would like you to remember just this first slide, what I have. The climate change can reach crisis levels in few decades, affecting the rich and poor. So it's just not a poor man's problem. We saw from the California fires, it affects everyone, young and old. On the positive side, there are plenty of scalable solutions. So we are not solving this problem because we don't have solutions. And we are starting a major effort. I'll talk to you about that. And we have a decade to implement these solutions. And enormous investments are needed. I personally think the governments are not capable. So we need to bring in private industries, and a lot of them. And so just wanted to touch on my own science a little bit, because I'm going to give you some grave predictions and then how to solve these. So you can ask, why should we trust this guy's predictions? So I just want to give you my track record. My own work is data-driven, and I helped launch the first climate satellite. It was planned in '78, launched in '83, and still collecting data about the planet. Later moved on to using unmanned aircraft about 10 years ago, because before drones were popular, and we squeezed close to 10 to 15 instruments in this aircraft, which is just about 7 feet wingtip to wingtip. And I made observations over China, over California, India. In my community, I'm known as the super spy. If you're polluting the planet, I know who's polluting it. So let me just give you my entire climate course in 30 seconds, right? So we know when we go out in our cars, the fuel is hydrocarbon. The carbon burns and becomes carbon dioxide. The problem with this carbon dioxide is that once you release it, about half of it stays for centuries, and about 25% stays for thousands of years. So we have dumped, since the time James Watt invented the steam engine, 2 trillion tons. Out of this 2 trillion, as of 2010, about 900 billion tons is still up there, okay? So this carbon dioxide covers the planet like a blanket. And it behaves exactly how the blanket keeps you warm on a cold winter night. The blanket keeps you warm not because the blanket gives any heat, it just traps your body heat. I don't know how many of you know, each of us generate 100 watts every second. So that, how much heat? It's like a 100-watt light bulb inside your tummy, okay? And you just put this blanket, you're warm. That's exactly what the planet is doing. The CO2, 900 billion tons, and then all these other pollutants are circling the planet and trap the heat. And the only way the planet knows how to get rid of that heat, just warm up and radiate that heat. So it's basic, fundamental, unbreakable laws of physics. And it is sad for me to see the science of climate change is trashed because it became political for no other reason. And so I started working on this 45 years ago, so you can know how ancient I am. About 8 years into the field, we realized in the 80s that this is a serious problem. So as a scientist, I thought, I need to make a prediction. That's how you verify your theories, right? Make a prediction and go observe them. So I said, when is this warming are we going to see? So we did what's called a statistical dynamical analysis and a simple climate model. And we predicted the signal should show up in 20 years. That's 1980, we made that prediction. And you see the observed temperature record starting from 1860. When we published it, the climate was even probably cooling a little bit. So people thought we were crazy. And 2000 was when we said testing of the theory, and it was 2001 when 1,000 scientists from United Nations said, yes, we have seen the warming. And that's not the only one. And I just talked about my work. There are many, many scientists. 8 of those predictions have all come true. That is why we scientists say this is global warming and it's caused by human activities. We predicted them, and we see those predictions coming true. So now let me talk about the future, what is ahead of us. As I said, let me back off a second. We started an effort called Bending the Curve. About 50 of us, all 10 campuses of UC, I chaired this committee, got together 2 years ago and published a report of what are the solutions we have to bend the emissions curve and the climate curve. And I'll talk to you about that later. So let's look at the imminence of climate change. As of 2010, we have already dumped, as I said, 2 trillion tons. In another 12 years, we would have dumped the 3rd trillion ton. In another 20 years, by 2050, the 4th. Our best understanding of climate change is that each trillion ton warms the planet by 0.7 of a degree. It's all in Celsius. So as of 2010, 8 years ago, we had already dumped enough junk to heat the planet by 1.5 degrees, which is the threshold for dangerous climate change. Okay? You go to 2030 with this current rate, you would have put enough to heat the planet by 2 degrees, and I'm not even bringing in other gases. There are another 1 degree from all these other gases. So that's what we face, ladies and gentlemen. 3 degrees, by most definition, is catastrophic. I was kind of shocked. The password for Wi-Fi is 3 degrees. I thought this group would have done 1.5. I'll show you the world with this password, 3 degrees. So these are my predictions. They were all published 2 years ago, and then series of reports. In 15 years, this slide was written 2 years ago, so it should be 13 years from now, we would have exceeded the threshold for dangerous climate change. In about 33 years, we would have exceeded the threshold for 2 degrees. Skip the 5%, and let's go to the white. And now read a series of studies were published just in the last 2 to 3 years, the consequences of 2-degree warming. 3.5 billion would be exposed to deadly heat. California has a 10 to 30% chance of 130 degrees heat waves. And you may sit here close to the ocean and say, oh, that's ridiculous, not going to happen. In 2012, Russia experienced that 135 degrees heat wave. 50,000 perished. Okay? And so, it's all happening, will happen. So we are not talking about millions anymore. We are talking about in billions. And you subject billions to such things, you're talking about instability. There is no governance system to take care of all this. And then the second is a Max Planck Institute study. 2.5 billion would be exposed to viruses like dengue, chikungunya, and many such viruses which are airborne. Turns out things like mosquitoes, places like India is getting too hot for them with this climate, so they are all migrating northwards. Okay? And so on and so forth. These predictions are what we call 50% probability. As you all know, you can never predict the future. All I can give you is probability. All I can say there's a 50% probability it's a 2-degree warming. So you ask me, what is a 5% probability? This question I started asking because of our Governor Jerry Brown. He says, Ram, you got to tell us what are the worst possible consequences, confining within your science. So there is a 5% probability that the warming would already be 3 degrees in 32 years. So it's very hard for us to wrap our head around 5%. So how do you relate to a 5% event? If I tell you that plane has a 1 in 20 chance, that's what 5% is, falling down, none of you are going to get on that plane. But we collectively are sending our children and grandchildren on that plane. Okay? So that's what 5% probability means. So let me talk to you about issues which matter to us. This is drought, soil dryness. And this is predicted by the model developed by Princeton University, Columbia, 1 out of 20 models. You can see what they're showing for California. These are multi-decadal. What we experienced 4 years ago is a 4-year drought. This they are talking about 20, 30 years long. Most of Southwest, the entire Mediterranean region, Southern Europe, look at Amazon. There's no chance that forests are going to survive with this kind of a drought. And Australia is anyway too dry. They're going to go a little bit dry, so it's not good. Argentina. Do you know the worst climate news of this year it's going to be? Argentina is already experiencing the worst drought. Okay? And they are like California, a major food exporter. So you may think, this is just models, who knows? Look at the pattern we saw last 4 years. The California drought, and then look at the Mediterranean region, Brazil. Nature is already giving us a warning. We are just too lackadaisical to pay attention. So go back to this map, if I can go back. And look at California, Southwest, look at Amazon, look at the Mediterranean, and look at this map. This is happening. All we are saying is it just happened for 3-4 years. It's just going to become more permanent. Okay? So, astronomers are looking for Goldilocks zone, the planets in the right distance from the sun. Like Goldilocks had 3 choices, and she chose always the right temperature, the porridge. Look at our Goldilocks zone. This is a prediction by a model. It's called the National Climate Model. I trust this the most because I helped develop it 30 years ago. I know what's there, and I know what's not there. And our models are nowhere close to real world. But this model is showing our Goldilocks zone is shrinking. That is the precipitation patterns. Okay, how it's the yellow regions is going to decrease. This is a consistent pattern coming with most models. East and west would get dry, and there's a small region of the Great Plains may escape it. Just imagine the population would be 10 billion. We are losing the Amazon and the Mediterranean, all food-producing regions. Who's going to produce the food? So, concerned by all this, I commissioned a meeting last November at the Vatican with a message sent by Pope Francis. So our governor showed up. Who can resist an invitation from Pope Francis? And so is Kevin DeLeon, our Senate Pro Tem. I believe he was here. So that's our governor talking. We talked about this, focused on the health impacts. And we brought in the top physicians from US, all over the world. WHO co-sponsored it. And we came to this remarkable sort of sad conclusion on the left-hand side. Climate change without aggressive intervention can soon become an existential threat. Mind you, scientists like us, we don't use these words. Do you know who signed on to that? Stephen Hawking. He personally wrote to me, tell me what I can do to help. Of course, he passed away a couple of weeks ago. Affecting the health of everyone, rich and poor, young and old. And the last one is my own statement. This is, I think of this, the mother of all challenges we face. It's a fight for our life, our own lives. So the question is, what happened And the person, what is the cause? And I found the best of this was written by Goethe in his Faust poem. Just read that. Fate has put a spirit in his behest. There is a spirit inside us. Drives him madly on without a pause. What is our mad drive? Oh, everything has to grow, GDP, economy has to grow, nothing can stabilize, right? It says, overleaps the joys of earth and natural laws. You know, about 25 of us, we call ourselves Earth League, mostly old men, right, like me. And we concluded we are already exceeding 3 of the 10 boundaries the planet has for us. Climate change would become the 4th boundary would exceed. Then you ask why. This came from our meeting, but I took this thing from this book, McMichael's book. We are living off nature's capital, not from nature's dividends. And you know, as businessmen, what happens if you spend your capital? You have nothing left. So, now I come to the positive message, right? Fortunately, it's not too late. And I want to give you an example of what we are doing in California. This was a meeting I organized in Sacramento, first meeting of this. We call ourselves California Collaborative for Climate Change Solutions. I'm excited to tell you, all major campuses of California, we are coming together. We'll say enough time on the bench, we need to take our knowledge and take it to the field, okay? Stanford, Caltech, all 10 UC campuses, 15 campuses of CSU, USC, and we gathered, this is our first meeting, and our primary goal is translation of research into solutions. Okay? So, and we have come with, just in a month time, these are how all the universities are spread. Entire California is involved in this, okay? And what is our mission statement on the right-hand side? To accelerate the translation of research findings into practical climate solutions. Again, quoting Goethe, I love his writing. He said, learning is not enough, you must act, okay? And learning is not enough, you must apply. The second is to test innovative technologies through high-impact pilot projects. Again, quoting Goethe, he said, willing is not enough, you must do. See, we scientists, we were just staying in our labs, thinking all we have to do is publish, policymakers would read it and solve the problem. It's not happening. So we got to get in there, and we were able to persuade all these academics. But our main goal is that scale these solutions to the national and global level. California is already a living laboratory. You know, take Oakland, it's doing amazing things. San Diego, we have a Republican mayor. We are on the lead charge. Republican. Leading on carbon neutrality. By 35, 70% of our energy is going to be, carbon renewables, right? We said the issue is then to scale this up. Because if all that happened is California cut its emission, we can cut our emissions to 0. The climate would not even know. Our emission is 0.5%. So we have to figure this out. There's no use just doing it here. It's to our survival. We need to take it outside. Scale this, okay? So I think of this, honestly, we all have to think on grander scales. This is a problem like landing man on the moon, probably even bigger, okay? So we have come with, we want to address this problem in a holistic way. Many of you think it's a technology problem. Our group says, not really. It's a multi-dimensional problem. The first thing you need is societal transformation. We have to educate the public, change the dialogue, have cradle-to-grave education on protecting nature for future generations. Okay, we are starting a massive education program. We already launched it in the UC system. There are numerous others. Governance solutions, we know the importance of that. Market mechanisms, that's where you come in. Cap and trade, carbon offsets, whatever. Technology solutions. Fundamentally, what's very exciting when I got into it, the technology part is the simplest part. All we have to do is to convert everything, your cars, your house heating, your everything, to electricity and generate that electricity using renewables. And there's a huge thing about that. They say, oh, there's no sun in the night, there's no wind this season. So they're storing the electricity in batteries. But there's a whole new thing coming, hydrogen. Generate hydrogen when that sun is abundant and store that energy and burn the hydrogen in fuel cells. Okay? So the solutions are there. And then when I mentioned this, economists and business guys tell me, oh, it's too expensive. I said, if you're going to lose all of California, agriculture, it's not the expense, it's not the issue. We just have to figure out a way to make it happen. Okay? And then we have, ultimately, sadly, we have just put too much. Even if you cut all your emissions to zero, the planet's still going to warm beyond 2. And what does that mean? There's already too much junk there. You have to suck it out. We call it negative emissions. You've got to take the carbon out. And we were able to get a billionaire to our meeting. He's going to start an institute for, he calls it mining atmospheric carbon. Just like we mine the coal, we mine the carbon out of the air. Okay? So basically, we have 4 levers. That's what our logo stands for on the top left-hand side, 4 interlocking levers. First is the carbon lever. You pull that down to bring the carbon emission to 0. And the short-lived climate pollutants, you bring it down, it'll cool the climate by 0.5 degree in 25 years. Methane, black carbon. You know, in California, we still burn our crop waste. When you burn things, it becomes black carbon. A black carbon, 1 ton of black carbon has the same effect as 2,000 tons of CO2. And methane, manures, they're all escaping. And all of that, we need to do that in any case. You capture that methane from the manure and use it as power. It becomes renewable. Okay? And then there are long-lived pollutants, atmospheric carbon extraction lever. In 1 month, these 31 campuses turned in 110 solutions. Okay? And they all looked, when we talked about yesterday, attractive. So how are we planning to do this? First is the applied knowledge creation, right? Basic knowledge is being generated, but this faculty involved in the C4S would work on taking it applied, and then we go out to meetings like this, generate the funds, and beta test them in campuses, in cities, particularly in Central Valley, where it's too hot, and apply to a minimum population of 50,000. That would be our definition for scaling. Then figure out which works, makes it, and then bring in private-public partnerships such as yours to scale it. Okay? So, am I running out of time, or do I have another 5 minutes to wrap it up? Or yeah, okay. So, what are we trying to do? The planet has already warmed by a degree as of 2018. It'll go to 1.5 by 2030. I stake my reputation on that. I don't see any way we're going to avoid that. 2050, I'm going to make bold predictions because I'm not going to be alive to be embarrassed if my prediction doesn't come true. We'll exceed 2. Okay? I'm not thinking beyond 2050. You don't solve the problem by then we have just drifted into another planet altogether. Okay? So by putting these 4 levers, again globally, you can see the curve will start to bend by 2030. We are going to overshoot. And then it'll come down when you start extracting that carbon, about 10 billion tons. And these are just not pipe dream. It's doable. And we have the money, the whole world. We've got 50, 100 trillion tons of trillion dollars of GDP. We are talking about, $500 billion a year, which is less than 2% of the GDP investment. Okay? And what's that red line doing? We just submitted a paper with a couple of my student and a young colleague of mine. Remember the satellite I showed? We are observing the planet still with that follow on to that satellite. And we are finding the Arctic is opening up, exposing the dark ocean. See, the ice reflects any white substance, reflects sunlight. The ice reflects 50% of the sunlight. That's what keeps the Arctic cold. And we are melting it. So, and we find there are some saying the Arctic would disappear by 2030 to 2035. If that happens, the increased sunlight absorbed by the Arctic is equal to putting another 1 trillion tons of CO2. It'll shoot up. I'm personally not worried about that problem because I'm not going to be alive by then. But that's an issue we have to face. That's what we are doing to the planet, committing to all these breakdowns. So I had a chance to brief Pope Francis. It was in a parking lot. See, normally when we brief the Holy Father, it's in a fantastic room inside St. Peter's Basilica. So I was leading this delegation of 50 of us had gotten in 2015. So I'm sitting in the parking lot, about to go in, and I'm having this vision of this room. And suddenly someone gets off from a small little car, it's a Ford Pinto or something like that. And from the front seat gets out was Pope Francis. Honestly, I was so disappointed. I was expecting to see some grandiose. He came straight at us. So I had to, and I was told you have only 2 minutes. Apparently he's rushing off to some big event was happening. So I told him 3 things. I said, look, Holy Father, we are all here. We are worried about climate change. And the second thing I said is that most of the pollution comes from the wealthiest 1 billion. There are still 3 billion people who have not even discovered fossil fuels. They're going to perish with the droughts, the floods. So Pope Francis, at the time, he's smiling at me. He said, what can he do about this in Spanish? And then the Chancellor of the Academy, Marcelo Serrano, translated to me. He said, the Holy Father is asking you, what can you do about this? So I told him that, look, you have become the moral leader of the world. You please ask people when you're in your speeches to be good stewards of the planet. And the Archbishop Minerath, who's looking at me, smiled, and some laughed loud. So when I went back to the walking, I asked them, I was telling the Pope something serious. Why were you guys laughing? They said, Ram, you were preaching to the Pope. And somebody said, there are only 2 people who have preached to the Pope. One is God, Jesus, and you is the next. So we then held follow-on meetings. The reason I'm showing all this is that I'm now pushing on the fact we need to have alliance with faith leaders and religions. They can talk to their public about climate change in a non-political way. We have all become politicized. So because of my work with Pope Francis, I was invited to Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska. It was just 2 months ago on a cold winter night. It was minus 10 degrees. Imagine talking to people about global warming with freezing temperature. I was shocked. That hall of 800 people was full. Young people and many, all branches. Honestly, I had no problem talking to them about climate change. Everyone came to me and said, My God, we didn't realize. And so I asked them, where do you get your news? And they told me, you don't want to know. And there was a woman standing for Congress, Kara, K-R-A. So she said, Ram, tell me what we can do without upsetting the fossil fuel industry. I said, cut down methane. You are the biggest farming region in the US. Capture your methane. She was laughing almost uncontrollably. She said, why, Ram? I now thought of a title for my campaign. I'm going to call it Bullshit Campaign, because I was telling her about processing manure. That's it. We want to put a smile on our children and grandchildren. That's what we have to do. Thank you.